The sun in the New Mexico sky was a brutal judge, hot, high, and merciless. It cast no shadow for mercy, no shade for lies. Eli Brennan, a weather-worn rancher with boots worn thin from regret, rode through the scrublands near the old trading trails of Doña Ana. He wasn't looking for anything but a stray calf. Instead, he found a girl hanging from a cottonwood like a ghost that refused to die. He heard it first, a sound too soft to be animal, too weak to be wind. Just a broken gasp. Eli stopped in the saddle, every muscle going still. The mare shifted beneath him, snorting uneasily, as if she sensed what he couldn't yet see. With rifle slung over his back, he followed the sound through dry juniper and boulders sun-bleached and silent. And then he saw her. She hung by her wrists beneath a gnarled tree skin, blistered under the sun, long black hair matted with blood and grit. Her toes barely touched the ground, body limp, but not lifeless. Above her head, a crude sign had been nailed into the bark, red letters smeared like a wound. "White man don't forgive." Eli staggered back a step, bile rising. The desert suddenly felt too quiet, like it was listening. His hand found the knife on his belt. He'd heard whispers in town out near Mesilla about Apache families resisting forced relocation. Soldiers called them troublemakers. But he knew what that meant. Burnt camps hung elders' daughters branded as warnings. "Christ," he muttered. "What did they do to you, girl?" She stirred faintly, a groan slipping from cracked lips. Her face, young, proud, and bruised, was covered in dust and blood. But something in her still fought. Eli stepped closer. The rope was old mesquite fiber, twisted cruelly to bite deep. Whoever did this wanted her to suffer, not just die. His hand trembled. That signed those words. They weren't just meant for her. They were meant for him, too. Meant to make him walk away. But he didn't. "I ain't them," he whispered, and with one clean slice, the rope snapped. She collapsed into his arms, burning with fever, as light as grief. He caught her just in time. Her fingers curled weakly into his shirt, not pulling him closer, just holding on. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. In the distance, the wind picked up, rustling the cottonwood leaves like whispers of the dead. Eli looked at the sign again, then down at the girl in his arms. Whatever happened next, he'd already made his choice. Eli Brennan didn't speak as he rode back toward his ranch, the girl cradled in his arms like a secret too fragile to name. Her body was burning with fever, but her breath came steady, though shallow. The blood had dried in streaks down her arms. The burn marks from the rope looked like Brand's punishments, not justice. Above them, the sun dipped low, pulling gold across the brittle land. The windmill on Eli's property creaked in the distance, a mournful, familiar sound. His ranch wasn't much. A one-room cabin, a barn that leaned too far east, and a fence line that hadn't held a full herd in years. But it was honest. It stood when most things in his life had fallen. He dismounted carefully, easing her down with the same care one might give to a broken-winged bird. She didn't speak, just shivered as her head pressed against his chest. Inside, he laid her on the cot, pulled the thin blanket over her, and sat down on a crate beside her. Her lips were split, her eyes fluttering like torn flags in the wind. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said softly, more to fill the silence than anything else. She didn't respond. He fetched a metal basin, warmed water on the stove, and grabbed a strip of cloth. His hands were steady, but his heart wasn't. He knelt and gently placed her feet into the water. She flinched just barely. He paused. When she didn't pull away, he began to clean the blood and dust from her skin. Slow, reverent motions like touching something sacred. The water turned red and brown, a silent testimony to whatever she'd endured. "You remind me of a river," he murmured. Not sure why he said it. "Dry most the year, but after rain it runs deep. Locals used to call it Quiet Snake. I camped by it once, when things were simpler." He looked up at her. She was watching him, though her eyes held no accusation, only distance. Pain. And something beneath that stillness, the kind that came after a scream, had long died out. "I'll call you Maris," he whispered. "Just for now. You look like someone who survived fire." The next few days passed with the slow rhythm of desert life. Eli kept his distance, slept in the barn, brought food and water, but never expected words. She ate what she could always, quietly always, with eyes watching the door, the windows, him. He noticed the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way her hands twitched in her sleep, curled like she was still hanging from that tree. She never asked why he saved her, and he never asked what had been done, but he listened. When she finally stood barefoot on the creaking floor blanket, wrapped around her shoulders, she didn't say a word. She walked to the basin, picked up a strip of cloth, and cleaned her own hands. That night, as he carved wood on the porch, she appeared beside him and just sat on the step, close, but not touching. He offered her a piece of jerky. She took it without looking. They didn't speak, but the silence had changed. Later, under lamplight, she knelt on the floor and began drawing in the dust. Her fingers moved with purpose, steady and sharp. Eli leaned in. She had etched a bird wing, spread wide flames, licking its feathers. It looked like it was rising, not falling. "What is it?" he asked, voice gentle. She answered finally, voice dry, and cracked like earth before the monsoon. "Firebird, my father's mark." Her hand trembled as she tapped the center of the drawing. "He was elder, peaceful man. We stayed when the soldiers came. They said we were dangerous, told us to move. Far place, no food, no water. We refused." She paused, her lips tightened. "They burned us." Eli said nothing. His chest ached. "My mother died with her prayer beads. My brothers while they slept. They left him hanging on our council pole." Her breath hitched. "They found me. Beat me. Said I stole. I didn't. Then they hung me up for others to see. Bait." She looked at him then, for the first time fully unshielded. "Why did you cut me down?" He swallowed. "Because I heard someone scream even if they didn't make a sound. And I didn't answer that scream once before. Not again." She stared at him, something shifting behind her gaze. Not trust, not yet, but something less like fear. "You still scared of me?" he asked. "No," she said, and for the first time her voice didn't shake. Maris began to move more freely within the four worn walls of Eli Brennan's cabin, though she still carried herself like someone expecting the door to burst open. She ate when he brought food, though only in small bites, and her gaze lingered just a moment longer on his hands, his eyes the silence between them. At night, she no longer flinched at every creak of the windmill or the scratch of coyotes in the distance. Still, she never spoke of what had been done to her. She didn't need to. It lived in her every movement, every glance. Eli gave her space. He left the cot for her and took to the barn, lying beside his rifle, with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and questions wrapped tighter still around his thoughts. Not about who she was. He didn't need names or wanted posters to know truth when it sat trembling in front of him, but about what her presence would bring. That sign still haunted him. "White man don't forgive." It had been left to warn, to curse, or maybe both. And it meant someone, some group, wanted her dead slowly. It was 3 mornings later when Eli noticed the boot print by the barn, smaller than his angle toward the back wall deep in the packed earth. Fresh. Military issue. Cavalry. He stood over it for a long time, jaw-tight eyes scanning the ridge lines. Sagebrush shifted under wind. Nothing moved. No sound but the dust whispering across gravel. Back inside, Maris was sitting near the window, knees drawn up, shoulders stiff beneath the old woven blanket. She didn't look at him when he entered, but her fingers clutched the fabric tighter. "You seen anyone?" he asked. She said nothing, but he saw it, something flicker across her face. Worry. "I think we've got company." That evening, he sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching shadows lengthen. The wind had died. Coyotes sang far off. Inside, he heard her pacing in soft, slow circles. By midday the next day, the rider came. A chestnut horse kicked up a tail of dust behind it. The man atop wore Union blue and cavalry gold. Lieutenant by the look of him. Hat low jaw, rough with stubble. "You Brennan," the man called, reining his horse to a stop. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive. Apache girl. Escaped custody near Cottonwood Flats." He pulled a folded notice from his pocket and held it down. Eli took it, already knowing what it would show. A sketch crude but recognizable. Sharp eyes. Long black hair. Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. $50 reward. Eli looked back up slowly. "Can't say I've seen her. You sure might be hurt. Hiding. Someone might have picked her up out of kindness. I see nothing but jackrabbits and a mule with a bad attitude." The lieutenant studied him, skeptical. "She's not just a runaway," he said. "Her people, they killed settlers last spring. Left that sign behind." Eli's jaw clenched. "If I see anything, I'll send word." The soldier held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded and turned his horse. The dust swallowed him whole. Inside, Maris stood behind the curtain. She had heard every word. Her eyes were wide, not frightened but alert, calculating. He stepped in, pulled off his hat, leaned it against the doorframe. "They came looking," he said, quiet. "Showed me a paper. Said you were wanted." She said nothing. "I told them no." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she didn't know whether to trust that. Whether she could. "I don't know what you did, Maris. Maybe someday you'll tell me. But out here, a man makes his choices. I made mine." He turned away, busying his hands at the stove. Behind him, she didn't speak. But something in the silence shifted just slightly. That afternoon, the air outside grew still again. The kind of still that made birds go quiet and men listen close to the ground. Eli sat outside, sharpening his knife, letting the rhythm of steel on stone quiet his nerves. Then he heard it. Footsteps, light, bare. Maris stepped outside. It was the first time she'd left the cabin on her own. Her feet touched the earth like she was remembering what it meant to belong to it. Wrapped in the woven blanket, she walked across the yard, slow and deliberate, toward the barn. Eli didn't speak. He watched. She stopped in a bare patch of dirt, knelt, and picked up a stick. Her fingers moved with intent. When he stepped closer, careful not to disturb her, he saw what she'd drawn. A bird in flight, engulfed in fire, not falling, rising. She didn't need to say a word. She was telling him everything. The drawing in the dirt stayed for days, untouched by wind or hoof, as if the desert itself dared not erase it. Eli passed it every morning, tipping his hat like it was a headstone. The bird in fire. A symbol of her people, of loss, of survival. Maris spoke more now, though only in fragments. She told him of her father, a minor chief who traded peacefully with settlers who welcomed missionaries into their camp, who asked for nothing but land to bury his elders. She spoke of the winter raid, of how a white woman had been found dead, and her people were blamed without question. How the soldiers came with torches, and fear how they called it justice. How her mother died, clutching the rosary beads left by a priest. Eli said little. He just listened, carving his hands into the wooden porch rail, as if he could scrape guilt out through his skin. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. But he did tell her this. Last spring I was away hunting. Came back to smoke and bone. They said it was your people. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. My sister, she was 16. I heard her crying from the barn. I waited. Thought help would come. His voice went quiet. She died waiting. Maris looked at him, eyes not soft, but clear. You saved me because you couldn't save her. He nodded. She sat beside him. Their shoulders brushed in silence. If I had been white, she asked, would you still have pulled the knife? Eli turned, faced her. He didn't look away. Instead, he reached out calloused fingers, cupping her chin, tilting her face toward his. I don't love skin, he said. I love what breathes beneath it. Her eyes welled, not from pain, but from something more dangerous, hope. And then they kissed. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was quiet, hesitant, born from two people who didn't believe they deserved anything soft anymore. Her hands trembled on his chest. His arm around her waist held steady, not possessive, but as if to say, I won't let you fall again. That night, she didn't sleep in the cot. She slept near the fire, curled in his coat, her fingers laced loosely through his. The wind outside was gentle for once. The rafters creaked like old trees sighing. Something between them had shifted. Not just trust, but tether. For the first time since he cut her down, she asked him something of her own. Do you want to know the truth? He said nothing, just nodded. She told him her name. Not Maris. Not the one he gave her. Her real name. Ayanna, she said, placing his hand over her heart. It means peaceful river. He repeated it, voice thick. Ayanna. The name fit her. Not the broken girl from the tree, but the woman now rising like water after drought. Days passed. She moved through the house like breath, sweeping, stitching, feeding the hens. She laughed once, sharp and sudden, when Eli cursed a mule that wouldn't eat. He'd never heard music so clean. But peace doesn't last long in a land that remembers every wound. It was a week later, late afternoon, when the dust trail rose again. 3 riders. One wore a tin badge that shone too bright. Joe Prescott, local rancher, loud in every saloon, but quiet when women screamed. The other 2 were men Eli didn't know, but their hands rested near their rifles, like they were itching for cause. We heard you might be harboring someone don't belong, Prescott called, dismounting with a sneer. You hear a lot of things Eli said from the porch. Don't make them true, Prescott spat. Apache girl. Rewards gone up. 50 cash in the thanks of every God-fearing man west of the Pecos. Eli stepped down slow. You got a warrant, Prescott laughed. You think this is a courtroom? Ayanna stood behind the curtain still but listening. The men didn't see her. I live alone, Eli said. Just ghosts and goats. Prescott narrowed his eyes. You're lying. And if you're lying, you'll burn with her. They rode off, but the message was clear. They'd be back, with more men, less patience. That night, Eli pulled the sign from where he'd buried it. White man don't forgive. The words still glared, though time had faded the red. Ayanna stood beside him. She didn't speak. He tossed it into the fire. I should have burned it sooner, he muttered. She said nothing. But her shoulder pressed against his, and that was answer enough. In that fire, something hateful turned to ash, and something else, something quieter, began to rise. The desert was too still, no wind. No birds. No hum from the old windmill that usually moaned like a tired ghost. Eli Brennan felt it in his bones, a hush too deep to be peace, the kind of silence that meant something was coming. He rose early, packed 2 saddlebags with dry biscuits, strips of smoked venison, and a single canteen. No note, no fire, no trace. He just looked to Ayanna across the yard. She stood at the fence line, hair braided tight, wrapped in the old coat he'd given her the night he burned the sign. Her eyes met his. No fear, only knowing. "Oh, we have to go tonight," he said, tightening the saddle cinch. She nodded. She already knew. There's land south of here past the border," he said, voice low. "In the Sierra Madres, they say your people still live free, far from soldiers, far from signs." Ayanna stepped closer. "And that's where we're going. No ceremony, no goodbyes. Just a quiet door left swinging behind them and a home-turned memory." They rode by starlight, the moon, high and clear, painting the ridgeline silver. Ayanna leaned forward against her mare, riding steady without question. She didn't ask what came next. She just followed. 10 miles from the border, the terrain grew harsher, jagged stone and thorny scrub, the kind of land even coyotes kept away from. The mountains loomed in the distance like something ancient and patient. Eli rode ahead, scanning the ridgelines, every shadow a warning. His gut twisted. Then crack, a gunshot rang out sharp and sudden. His horse reared as Eli twisted in the saddle, pain tearing through his side. Blood bloomed dark across his shirt as he slid from the saddle and hit the dirt hard. "Eli!" Ayanna cried, leaping from her horse. "Keep going!" he rasped, clutching his side. "No!" Another bullet snapped through the air, chipping the rock behind them. 2 figures appeared on the ridgeline, riders, with rifles raised. Eli groaned, trying to rise. "We have to move." Ayanna bent low, slipped his arm over her shoulder, and hoisted him with strength born from desperation. "Believe me," she whispered. "I wasn't planning on leaving." Step by step, they stumbled toward a narrow cut between the cliffs. Bullets whizzed past, slicing the night. Eli's boots dragged in the dirt. Ayanna pulled him along, gritting her teeth, her breath ragged. Somehow they made it through the stone passage, a tight cleft the horses couldn't follow. The riders slowed, wary of entering on foot. The canyon swallowed their sound. In the shadows, Eli collapsed to his knees. One hand pressed to his wound. Blood dripped onto the dust. Ayanna knelt beside him, her voice fierce. "You're not dying. Not after all this." His head tilted back against the stone breath shallow. "You said you wanted to be my wife." "I meant it." Even bleeding, he smiled. "Then we better make it through this pass." She held his face in both hands, her thumb brushing dirt from his cheek. "You held me when I was more ghost than girl," she whispered. "Now let me carry you." She tore a strip from her own shawl, pressed it to his wound, and held it there, praying not to the settler's god, but to wind to fire, to whatever spirits walked the cliffs and deserts, before maps drew lines through blood. That night, beneath stone walls and starlight, Eli drifted in and out of pain. Ayanna sat beside him, keeping watch knife in hand. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She had already lost everything once. She wouldn't lose him. And in the hush of that canyon, something sacred passed between them. Not spoken, not even seen, but rooted in the dust and blood they shared. Because love in the West was never simple. It was a wound you chose to bleed for. The river ran slow and steady, threading through the southern desert like a silver promise. By the time they reached it, Eli could barely sit upright in the saddle. Ayanna rode beside him, eyes narrowed against the sun, one hand always near his reins, the other resting protectively over her belly. It had been weeks since the ambush in the cliffs. Weeks of hiding, healing, and riding south through dry canyons and mesquite groves. At night, she changed his dressings by moonlight, whispered prayers into the fire, and sang old Apache lullabies she barely remembered from childhood. But he lived, and when they crossed into the land beyond the reach of tin stars and cavalry patrols, Eli finally exhaled a breath he'd been holding since the day he found her. They settled near the bend of a quiet river where cottonwoods leaned into the current and reeds whispered in the dusk. No roads passed nearby, no smoke on the horizon, just land and water and sky. Their home wasn't much, just a lodge made of pine and hide pieced together with stubborn hands and quiet care. But it stood, and it held them. Inside the walls bore no trophies, no crosses, no memories from the ranch Eli had left behind. Just bundles of dried herbs, a wooden bowl, 2 worn blankets, and a cradle waiting to be finished. Ayanna moved through the space, like the breath of the place itself, light, firm, alive. Her belly had begun to round gently beneath her woven sash, and with each stitch she added to the tiny white shirt in her lap. Something inside her softened. Eli spent most mornings working with the young Mustang they'd traded for at a village a day's ride north. He spoke little as always, but every time he glanced back toward the lodge and caught a glimpse of her behind the curtain, his mouth curved in that quiet, crooked smile she'd grown to love. She still dreamed of fire sometimes, of ropes and smoke, of the soldiers who tied her wrists and hung her like a warning. But she also dreamed of river stones, of calloused hands that cleaned her wounds, without asking anything in return, of warmth that grew instead of burned. One evening, as dusk fell soft across the water, Ayanna stepped barefoot into the shallows. She let the current curl around her ankles like an old friend. Then she pressed both hands over her belly and whispered, "A little one, your father, he didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Behind her, footsteps padded through the grass. Eli came to stand beside her boots, off pants rolled to his knees. He didn't say anything. He just took her hand. Their fingers twined, and together they stood in the river as stars blinked into view. No one had expected them to survive. A white rancher with a past he couldn't outrun, and an Apache girl they'd tried to hang. But here in this place, far from towns and fences and names carved in hate, they'd grown something gentle, not perfect, but real. Ayanna turned to him. "You want to know something true?" Eli nodded. She guided his hand to her chest over her heart. "And my real name? It's not Maris, not even Ayanna, though that's what my mother called me. It's Nayeli. It means, I am the one who is loved." Eli closed his eyes. He let the name settle inside him like rain after long drought. "Nayeli," he whispered. And then, looking at her, this woman he had carried through dust and blood, who had chosen him even when the world had not, he said, "You're the only home I've ever known." She didn't cry this time. She just held his hand tighter. In the months that followed, they built a life. They planted squash and sage near the river. They taught each other words from 2 languages the world tried to erase. They laughed more than either thought possible. When the child came, a daughter with his eyes and her hair, they named her Luma after the moonlight that had lit their escape. At night, Eli would rock her gently and hum tunes his mother used to sing. Ayanna would sit nearby, weaving eyes, soft and proud. There was no law here, no flag, no border but the one they had crossed together. And still the river ran slow and sure, peaceful, just like her name. The rains came late that year. By the time the first storm rolled over the Sierra foothills, the earth was already cracked, thirsty, aching for relief. But inside the little riverside lodge, the air was thick with warmth of breath of firelight, of things too sacred to name. Eli sat cross-legged on a woven mat, whittling a small wooden rattle. Each groove he carved was for a promise made in silence. Across from him, Ayana nursed their daughter Luma, her body curved in protection, her face lit with the kind of calm that only comes after war. Outside, the wind brushed the reed walls like an old friend, and somewhere nearby, the river hummed its low, steady song. It had been almost a year since they escaped the north. A year since Eli had burned the hateful sign. A year since Ayana whispered her name into his chest and turned his guilt into something that could bloom. They didn't count days anymore. They counted new words spoken. First steps. The way Luma's tiny fingers wrapped around Eli's thumb like she'd always known it. But freedom, real freedom, was never untouched by fear. News sometimes traveled upriver. Traders spoke of rising tensions again. More settlers pushing west, more land seized in the name of progress. One man said soldiers were clearing villages out near the Pecos. Another whispered that a preacher had been hanged for marrying a white woman to a Navajo man. Eli said nothing when he heard it, just nodded and thanked them for the salt and grain. But that night he sat by the fire longer than usual, staring into the flames until his eyes stung. Ayana didn't ask. She didn't need to. She sat beside him, brushing her fingers along his forearm in slow, grounding circles. "I never thought I'd live this long," she murmured, watching the sparks rise. "Not after that tree. Not after what they did." Eli reached for her hand. "You didn't just live. You made life." She turned toward him, and her voice dropped lower, thicker. "Do you ever wonder if they'll find us?" "Sometimes. And if they do..." Eli looked to the door, then to the cradle, then to her. "Then they'll see what they couldn't kill." Ayana's eyes shone in the firelight, wet but unbroken. She nodded once, and it was enough. Their love wasn't quiet anymore. It moved through the house like smoke, like breath, like resistance. In a world where her name had once been listed beside a bounty and his had been muttered in suspicion, they had built something that defied both memory and blood. Ayana had once told him, the greatest act of rebellion wasn't fighting, but surviving. And loving despite the scars. They had made a home from nothing, and in that act alone, they had taken back everything. Some nights they would sit by the river and tell Luma stories, stories of sky gods and wind spirits of rivers that remembered names long after people forgot them. Eli would speak slowly, careful with her learning tongue, and Ayana would translate when she could, her voice weaving between two worlds. The child cooed and kicked her legs and fell asleep to the rhythm of peace hard won. Sometimes Eli dreamed of the ranch of the porch, the windmill, the trailhead, where he first saw her hanging. He'd wake, sweating, heart thudding like a war drum. But then he'd turn, and there she'd be breathing beside him, real and whole, her hand resting on his chest, like she was anchoring him to the earth. Other times Ayana dreamed of the sign, not the words, just the wood. It burned slow in her dreams, the flame never rushing, never flickering, just steady like her heartbeat. And when she woke, she no longer trembled. One morning after the rain had passed, Ayana stepped out barefoot into the clearing. The sun was soft, the dirt damp and fragrant. She drew a new symbol in the earth with a stick, a circle unbroken encircling a tree with open branches. Eli came to stand beside her. "What's that one mean?" he asked. She smiled, brushing hair from her eyes. "It means we stayed." He didn't reply, just reached for her hand and laced his fingers through hers. And together they stood, not as fugitives, not as victims, but as proof. Proof that love can outlive fire, that names can be reborn, that even in a land shaped by bullets and betrayal, a family can still take root and bloom. And the river ran beside them, steady as ever, unmoved, unbroken, free. Seasons changed without ceremony. The river, once swollen from spring rain, now flowed thinner, quieter. Reeds leaned in golden and brittle, whispering of the dry months to come. In the shade of the lodge, Ayana sat stitching a small leather pouch medicine for the child's cough, a blend of wild herbs her mother once taught her to find. Luma slept nearby, cheeks, sun-warmed fingers curled in a dream she hadn't yet learned to fear. Eli stood on the ridge above the homestead rifle across his back, eyes fixed on the horizon. Smoke curled far to the west, too faint to tell if it came from a campfire or something crueler. He'd seen what raids left behind ash where names used to live. His jaw tightened, but he didn't call out. He just watched, measured the wind, then turned back toward the lodge. Peace, he'd learned, wasn't a promise. It was a daily choice. They had carved out something fragile here, threaded together by wounds but sewn tight with care. And still, the world beyond the river's bend stirred. Word had reached them in snatches, more cavalry movements near the old Apache paths, whispers of towns burning, reservations expanding. The war hadn't ended. It had only changed its name. Ayana met him at the edge of the garden, her eyes searching his. She saw the smoke before he spoke, nodded before he asked. "Do we stay?" she said softly. Eli didn't answer right away. He looked down at Luma, safe, still whole, and thought of that tree in the cottonwoods. The sign. The silence. The fire that had almost taken her. Then he looked at the home they'd built. For now, he said. Ayana nodded, tucked a lock of hair behind her ear, and turned back toward the lodge. Behind them, the child stirred, then let out a soft cry, half protest, half song, and the wind picked up warm and restless, as if it too remembered what it meant to run. Somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed like thunder yet to fall. But for now, in this quiet place, love remained. And so did they. Some wounds don't leave scars on the skin, but they shape the way we love, trust, and remember. Ayana and Eli's story isn't just one of survival. It's about choosing love over fear, healing over hatred, and building something gentle in a world that often isn't. Their journey reminds us that the past can haunt us, but it doesn't have to hold us. That even in the harshest deserts, literal or emotional, something beautiful can still take root if we're brave enough to let it grow. Maybe you've lived through your own fire. Maybe you carry quiet battles no one sees. If this story moved something in you, maybe it's because deep down you believe what they did, that it's never too late to choose love and never too far gone to come home. Tap the screen now to continue their journey. And if you'd like more stories like this, where the land remembers, where hearts still beat strong, click like and consider subscribing to Wild West Love Stories. It's never too late for a good story, especially one that stays with you long after the fire dies down.